And I think we're live, Jethro.
Hey.
So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to. I'm coming to you from the beautiful Bay of Islands up in Aotearoa. I actually stepped out of my office for today because it was getting a bit claustrophobic. Um, Overdose and Chill number 73. Delighted to welcome Jethro Marks from the Nile. Just off air, we've been sharing a few little war stories, so I think we're going to have some fun today, talking about some hustle and grind and how both Overdose and the Nile have had a bit of success in taking a bit of that underdog spirit.
Yeah,
Jethro, welcome. How are you, my friend?
thank you. I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Tremendous. So, if anyone's got any questions, we're out live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, I think even Twitter. Post them in the comments. Raven is hidden behind the scenes here. She's going to pick up those questions and throw them into chat. And, this is a pretty open forum. So, Jethro, we always like to kick off in just tell us who you are, where you've come from, what the Nile is, frame what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Hey, thanks. So we've been around for a while now. We were one of the first online retail companies that still is around today. We kicked off in about 2003, and our story was probably not too dissimilar to yours. We were three young 24-year-olds without much sort of view of what we were going to do in the world. And I came back from a backpacking trip and had a view I either needed to start a business or get a job. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll just have a crack at this business thing, and if it doesn't work out, then we can always go and get the job. So got together with a couple of guys I'd worked with in a prior company just before I'd done my travels. And we set out with a very sophisticated business plan, find anything we could find that could be fitted in a box and shipped to someone somewhere in the world and try and sell it on the internet. And so off we went. And we were sitting in Auckland. There were three of us. We had, I think we had 3 computers, a bit of software, and $5,000. And that was our sophisticated business plan. And off we went. And we cracked on with that for about 6 months until about 6 months later, we said, look, we're in probably 15 different lines of business here. We were doing everything from books, DVDs, games, toys. We were selling jewelry. We were going down to the markets in the south of Auckland and buying out entire stalls of Polynesian handmade art and selling them to the rest of the world as South Pacific treasures. We were literally doing anything we could kind of figure out. We said, all right, whilst this is all very interesting and some of these products have better margins than others, the one line of product that just seems to be kind of working and sort of scaling quite nicely are books. And it was a bit of a counterintuitive move at the time because Amazon was growing quite quickly, and it was in we were post the dot-com crash. We were in the early stages. It was like I consider that to be a bit of the wasteland because it was pre-SaaS, pre-cloud. Online commerce, online retail was a little bit out of vogue. It was something that had been seen as having had its day, and no one really knew what it was going to be about. And so everyone did know that Amazon sold books, and although they weren't in Australia and New Zealand yet, the general thesis was these guys will rule the world, and what do you how do you make any money in this? And what we said, well, our data doesn't support that. The way we kind of view the world is that the market is big, it's growing fast. They may have a dominant position, but there's clearly, based on what we're seeing, evidence of the fact that there's a market there for us to get into. And so we discarded, it was our sort of first bold decision. We discarded 50% of our business and got rid of all the other lines we were doing and just focused in on the one thing. And that then led us to an interesting dilemma because we couldn't get a lot of books in New Zealand. And so we had to go abroad to get more. And so that brought us to Australia, where we set up our first international operation. And off we went. So we had a distribution facility here. We put someone locally, then we brought them back. We outsourced the distribution at first. And we managed to access a whole lot more inventory. And then we did the same in the UK, and then we replicated it again in the US. And that sort of by about, once time had sort of passed, and 6, 7, 8 years had gone by, we'd sort of got access to most of the books that were available in the English language, in the new books. And the business kept growing, which was great. And we were sort of looking at things a little bit all over the place. We were very marketplace heavy at the time. So we sold a lot on any marketplace that we would basically take our products. And that worked until we sort of started looking around the domestic market in a very sort of what we saw around us was that things were growing quickly. In Australia and New Zealand, it's been a laggard in terms of digital adoption for many years. Our penetration rates in online retail were substantively lower than the rest of the world. I would say even up to the last couple of years, we were still behind. But what we could see was things were growing quickly, and there just wasn't a ton of, there were a few companies sparking up here and there, and some of the companies today that we would consider the leaders were starting up around the same time. And so we started focusing on the domestic market very strongly in Australia, became a very much an Australia first approach. And at that point, we re-domiciled from New Zealand to Australia, which was kind of made sense. I thought, if you're going to be in market and make things happen, you sort of need to be in market and make things happen. It just made it a lot easier. And initially, I thought, there's no real difference between New Zealand and Australia, but the reality is it was different. It's a different market. And once you get on the ground, all of a sudden you started seeing the differences. And I think that was quite a good lesson to be learned. And so that was back in, I don't know, it was 7 or 8, like a long time ago. And so off we went. And then kind of as things progressed, we then came full circle and we started launching new categories again, because now we've built out the supply chain, we built out our distribution, we had the logistics capability, we built all our own software. Again, so back to what I was saying, today you can set up with a Shopify store, it costs nothing. There was no Shopify store. There was, you had a choice of Yahoo stores, which was absolutely the worst of the worst, or you had to get enterprise software, which was well out of our reach at the time. So we had to build everything. And, for better or worse, that's kind of been sort of mainstay of what we've done. We've literally built all the technology in-house, which has given us a ton of flexibility and advantage. And I say we've sort of built this little Frankenstein of a system that is absolutely perfect for us, but probably isn't suitable for others. But that doesn't matter. It works really well for us and is entirely bespoke to our requirements. So then we sort of built that all out. And so we started adding ranges and categories, and, we added different lines. We got back into doing DVDs and toys and slowly started building it out. So today we're in like about 15 different categories. Half of our business is in Australia. The other half is offshore. We have a team that's now fully distributed across Australia. We no longer have offices. We have another team in the Philippines, all in-house, and warehousing across the region. And we're just in the process now of reestablishing and doubling down on our warehousing in North America and the UK.
Incredible.
Sorry, that's a long-winded, short way of telling the story.
So it sounds like you flexed a bit between pure play, drop shipping, marketplacing. Where does that growth come from? Because in that books market, surely we're going into 8 and 9 figures of SKUs, right? Of the potential permutations of those products that you need to cover. So I'm assuming that there was a lot of drop shipping and supporting other retailers through that. Is that fair?
Yeah, great question. So books, we've got, I think there are 50 million active titles on the system across all the SKUs that we run, predominantly which are books, and all the non-media as well, but it's a much smaller subset of product. We have a variety of different ways that we do things, from everything from a little bit of drop shipping where required, right through to holding stock in our own warehouses. And then there's a variety of other options in between that we play. So it just depends what makes the most amount of sense in which market to which customer base. We're using whichever SKU. We run a variety of different programs to be able to accommodate that. And that's just, that's books and all the other categories as well. In terms of, the earlier part of the question. So we're a pure play business. We have no physical bricks and mortar retail outlets. We're purely online. Philosophically, we don't really see much of a difference by channel. So we run our own websites, of which we now have 11, distributed across Australia and New Zealand, across the different categories. We have multiple marketplace accounts in each country that we operate in, across all the different channels that you could possibly sell. And our basic philosophy is where the customer goes is where we need to be. It's not up to us to dictate to them where they get to choose to shop. So from our point of view, we're entirely channel agnostic. The orders come in, we take them in, we distribute them. It goes down to the warehousing, wherever it is. The system has no knowledge of where it comes from. It has no real interest, and then processes out. The warehouse again, ships out again without any real sense of where the order has come from. It just gets fulfilled based on the rules that have been set. And I think that's where we sort of differ with a lot of other companies that have taken a very kind of single store, single brand focus. We've got the Nile, we've got these other brands, but our view has always been that is one part of a much bigger puzzle and an approach to market. And ultimately, we are much more interested in just doing transactions and satisfying customers rather than worrying about what channel they specifically came through.
So I think a common point of interest for many of the other retailers that tend to listen to these podcasts is the challenges of entering into new markets, crossing borders, be it through seeking the attention of new consumer bases, the FX risk that you're running, cross-border logistics. Can you talk us through some of the challenges and home runs that you've had through that, Jethro?
Sure. So we've made so many mistakes in this. We've stuffed up so many times. Like, it's always been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a couple to the side, and then keep going.
Well, you're kind of like, as you alluded to, you're kind of like the older statesman of online commerce now. So you had to break down those barriers, right?
I feel to some extent we're like the punch bags. You know, we've just taken all the hits. But coming back to my earlier point, like when we started, there was no infrastructure in place at all at the moment. We had to build it all up. Today, the infrastructure is all there. Like, I just look at the simplicity with which you can do things now and how much effort we had to put in. Just a quick little segue. I remember we built some code. I can't remember exactly what the application was, but we'd spent like close to 2 years building this piece of code. And I think literally within 2 months of releasing it, getting it rolling, and it was iterative, but eventually getting it up to full steam, some guy came out with a SaaS product, which for $50 a month replicated exactly what we'd spent all this time building. I'm like, why couldn't we have waited 2 months and just used that instead of having to build it ourselves? But no, I think like it's becoming a flatter and flatter world with a lot more ease. Like, if I think about the complexity of opening up a bank account, going back to 2005 or something, I went to the US trying to open accounts. I had to visit 27 banks before one would accept opening an account for me, because you just didn't meet the criteria. You know, you were like a little green person from another planet, and you turned up and they didn't know what to make of us. So they would go through their checklist, and sure enough, there'd be one thing that you didn't meet. And eventually we kind of figured out a way to do it and got around. But I mean, it was like a huge amount of effort. Today, you know, you go to a company like Payoneer or World First, whatever, you can be up and running in within a foreign currency account, and, you know, with marketplace payments coming in within about 10 minutes, not 10 minutes, like in a very short space of time. And the complexity is gone. It's not easy. So sorry, let me just caveat that it's not easy at the moment, but I just think that the path has been well trodden, and there are a lot of really capable, amazing service providers that have come along. When we started out, for example, shipping it offshore, you know, you start out having to use a basic untracked mail product, you know, which is hit and miss, and maybe it got there, maybe it didn't, and that was an awful customer experience, absolutely awful. And so then we had to start sort of thinking around different ways of doing things and building our own shipping methodologies. So, you know, instead of handing over to a mail company or the Oz Post or New Zealand Post or whoever here locally and hoping for the best, we would go over to the market that we were looking at, cut a deal with whoever was like a decent final mile provider, and then print those labels here, consolidate the shipment, send them across, and you then got to control every leg of the journey, rather than, you know, just being beholden to one company that did or didn't do their job properly and you had no control over it. So the outcome of that is that, and to this day, we use a similar model, you know, into multiple countries. And so what that does is allows us to get visibility of the supply chain right from the start through to the end, and having direct relationships with anybody who touches the product along the way, which we find makes a huge difference in terms of getting the kind of outcomes that you're looking for, and maintaining expectations rather than being beholden to one. So I think, you know, those are the kind of things that we had to sort of work our way around. Today, like I said, there are a lot of great providers. You don't need to do it to the same degree that we had to. It's one of the cool things I look at it and go, right, if I wanted to build a direct-to-consumer brand today, or I wanted to build an online business, and take it global, like how would you know, where are the blocks? There really aren't. You know, FX, there are some great solutions out there which can provide, like I said, with Payoneer, or, you know, it's a great solution that enables you to manage a lot of that risk and hold, you know, they help you manage it and give you access to places without having to go and set up companies in every single different country that you want to operate in. You want to ship internationally, you know, there are already a great bunch of providers that will do that much better than what the Post of before did. Even Post today is a lot better than it was. And so I think it's not easy, like you can just kind of roll it out. But I think the road to getting that done today is not as complicated as it was circa 15 years ago when we started doing all this.
So when you're picking those new markets to go and enter into, are you going in there as the Nile, spinning up local .Malaysia sites, or are you entering through other marketplace channels where there's already demand for the product you have in stock, or is it a hybrid?
Yeah, no, it's definitely the latter. So
Okay.
outside of our core main markets, which are mostly the sort of big English-speaking countries. So to answer that question, if you go back a couple of years, like before COVID, we were shipping pretty much to about 90 countries every month. Like we would pick up orders from all over the place. You get orders from Russia, you can't do that anymore. You pick up orders from Brazil, you pick up orders from wherever they came. And it worked. And so that was very much off the back of a marketplace strategy. Our website strategies have been largely focused on Australia and New Zealand. And so we just focus on the marketplaces as our primary entry into those markets. And then once you kind of get established and understand where the opportunity set lies, at that point, then we can roll out specific brands to target them. But the thing I love about the marketplaces is that on a day one basis, you get access to the globe. And then the challenges that we've encountered, specifically over the last 2 years, have been largely around supply chain, where the logistics have fallen over to such an extent because there've been no planes in the sky. Thankfully, we're now seeing visibility on when the planes are coming back, and with all this world change, we'll be able to hopefully enable those markets again, and then start getting back to the strategy of sort of targeting a particular market, and then to the point you made, going with the marketplace, understand where the demand opportunity lies, or where the opportunity for the products that we've got is, and then coming up with a website strategy to kind of go in with on top of that. In Australia and New Zealand, our strategy is sort of a threefold one, which is one, we are on all the major platforms. We are large players on eBay, Amazon, Catch, Kogan, etc. And in the New Zealand ones as well. And then we have the Nile, which is our department store, which has the full range of all products, very book heavy, but has all the other lines. And then we have these category specific sites as well, which are catering towards a particular customer who wants to, have a certain experience around something.
So as a retailer there, and sort of bringing this into consumer centricity, where you're diversifying so many touch points with your customer, and to a certain extent, a lot of the Nile's product is fairly democratized, right? It's not unique. How do you balance that need for awareness and capturing, people that are on eBay searching for your book versus building loyalty and retention off of that client where they go to the Nile for inspiration rather than just stumbling upon the Nile because they've got the book at the best price that I want? Where do you find that middle line?
Yeah, so the way I see it is that, I guess if you had a Venn diagram and you had each of the different channels, eBay, Amazon, our site, the site to me is really Google Social. That's kind of the channel, because that's where most of the traffic would come from. There's overlap across all of them. And there's definitely pockets of customers who will shop quite actively across multiple different channels. Mm-hmm. But I think the vast majority don't necessarily do that. I think there's a bunch who will shop around extensively on every different channel. And then there's some who just they get comfortable in a particular thing. Some are comfortable on eBay, some are comfortable on Amazon, and some are just comfortable on, shopping on Google, finding a site and then liking it. So from our perspective, it's not even trying to migrate them across the two. It's a case of, like, if we have an eBay customer, we know that they're comfortable on that platform. We know that they like using the eBay system. In previous years, they would have used PayPal. Now they use eBay's platform, managed payments.
So you're almost actively not trying to disintermediate them. You're letting them be where they want to be.
100%. I mean, I think, our learning was going back 14, 12, many years ago, was that migrating them, trying to push them to migrate didn't even work. Like they weren't even that interested. I think what happens particularly on these more established marketplaces is the customer is so comfortable in that environment that that's their go-to place to shop. So, I've seen research for many years now that says that a lot of customers will go to Amazon or eBay and will bypass Google as their first port of call when it comes to product search. I know personally that's the way I shop. Like I'm not necessarily going to Google, because I find that with Google, I've then got to go through the next layer of kind of deciphering who that store is if I haven't encountered them before, and then looking for all the different points to figure out, are they trustworthy otherwise? And sometimes it's worth the effort, because then you find an amazing experience, like anybody who finds our stores would be, and then they'll be hopefully devotees. But beyond that, I think there's a customer who is just comfortable in a certain environment, and what we can best do is try and exceed expectations within that environment, and we'll get the retention. And when we've looked at the numbers, they come back. Like they do. The customers who are there, who like what we do, will come back to us on a regular basis. And the retention rates are sometimes even better than our sites, because in some cases, we've had customers who've been with us 10, 15 years, and they just keep coming back for whatever it is that they want, or they might come back and then 5 years later turn back up again. But they're in the environment, they like it, we're big players there, and we're able to keep them happy.
So I think a lot of other merchants' reticence about moving into these eBay, Amazon spaces is that, that denigration of your customer data, and that you're kind of you're just becoming part of a supply chain. But clearly you've cracked that. But I imagine you must have some stories out there where you've had the squeeze put on you, and it's become a bit of a race to the bottom sometimes. And people see your success, and then suddenly there's 50 other people trying to sell that same SKU. Although I'm not sure they had access to the South Auckland Pacifica markets like you did.
Yeah, I mean, look, of the 50 million, the majority are like, I think you sort of said, they're commoditized products which you can get elsewhere. There's only a few like that. We don't, unfortunately, our current model doesn't really support that anymore, because we sort of need barcodes, and those products don't support barcodes. But look, how would I think about this? I think, it depends on what business you're running, right? From our point of view, we're fairly product agnostic. We're onboarding thousands of products on a weekly basis. Product coming in and out available. We don't necessarily want to pick winners. Our systems are very much built around identifying pockets of demand, satisfying those pockets of demand until there isn't the demand anymore, and then just kind of moving on to the next thing. So our business model isn't necessarily the one to emulate or copy for, or even try and take too much from in terms of the approach. If I was running a D2C business where the brand was everything and you were trying to build it out, I mean, I think there is a way to play the marketplaces. It just wouldn't necessarily be the way that we do it. The way we do it is putting everything everywhere to the extent that we can. I think with a product line like that, where I've seen some success, is you might have certain lines which are suitable for the marketplace to introduce customers to the brand, and potentially where you've got a bit of margin to play with, or it might be clearance, or it might be it just might be a particular line of product that you sell into that particular channel, but you don't necessarily give the full SKU range. There's a few different ways you could try it and see what works. But I would be, at the end of the day, the cost of setting it up and getting up and running is not that great, and you're not tied into any contractual obligations. So if I'm a retailer and I'm looking for growth, and I want to find some extra customers, and I want to try and expose my brand to some other places, it's not a bad way to do it. You're getting access to massive customer bases, like in eBay Australia. I mean, talking 7-8 million uniques a month. I don't know what Amazon's numbers are, but they're probably up there as well. And if it doesn't work, what have you lost? A bit of time and energy. But our entire experience for all the years we've been doing this is just trial and error, because there are no textbooks on this. And if there are textbooks, they're out of date within the space of days or weeks. I'm sure your experience has been very similar. You might have a methodology for doing something that's been highly effective, and then one day it's not, and you've got to change it up, and really quick.
Yeah. And has that led you into some of these Southeast Asian marketplaces as well? Are you active on your Tmall's and Lazadas and Shoppies of the world?
We were in the process at the start of COVID. Prior to COVID, I think within 3 months of getting that started, that particular project. And then when COVID hit, we had to reprioritize very quickly, and unfortunately, because it was a too early a stage to warrant. So we're now slowly getting back into readdressing that as one of the other markets that we want to have a look at. It's a very interesting contrast what I'm finding. So in the European markets, North American markets, Australasian markets, everything's relatively similar in terms of the way that we go about things. Amazon and eBay largely conform to the similar ways of doing business for the most part, and the platforms are consistent across all the different markets. And even Catch, Kogan, they're not that different. Trade Me, or the market in New Zealand, but in Southeast Asia, the marketplaces operate very differently, and so we're having to kind of go through a whole new learning cycle. Of the methodologies that we've got for how we play the marketplaces in other markets haven't worked as well there, and we've had to really kind of re-engineer the whole way that we approach it. It's a much more curated experience. There's a lot more. It's
almost back to front in many circumstances, right? Where we've seen some of our retailers where it's actually the influencer that's selling the goods. They're no longer the influencer; they are the retailer of influence and product out there as well.
Yeah. And I think there also you're seeing there's a trend there which I think we're going to see here as well, which is brands are a lot more on the front foot selling direct to consumer through those marketplaces, whereas the retailers probably have less sway in that regard. So there are a lot more even consumer products, whatnot, where in essence, I think what it is the marketplace is essentially facilitating the entire transaction and doing a lot of the work for them. But it means that as a retailer, you've got to come up with either a product set that's different, or you've got to come up with a different approach to it, or this, it's just not as consistent. And I think that's definitely a trend that we're going to see globally. We've supported a number of brands over the years that have wanted to sell direct, who we've supported on an end-to-end basis where we provide a full a full solution where from the perspective of the customer, they're dealing with the brand, but in behind we're doing everything. Yeah. And I just think there's going to be more of that going on, and I suspect we're going to grow that as we go, because more and more I see brands which are frustrated by the fact that they don't have that direct consumer experience. They're not getting the data that they want. They're not having the interaction that they want with consumers, and I think that's just going to happen. As more and more, whether it be in the supermarkets or whether it be across the line board. It's not. I wouldn't say it's specific to any one vertical. I just think that is a trend we're going to see more and more, and already some have done it very well, and others will do it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen that model rise and fall a couple of times. It seems to stick in Southeast Asia. There's a couple of guys like Singpost and A-commerce up in Singapore doing great work where they'll literally just take your entire brand and run the entire digital logistics, everything of there. I think the interesting part there is where does that sit between brand guardianship and then actual agency? Do you know what I mean? Who's actually owning and running that brand? I've seen it kind of peak and trough in the US. I recall going out to the US sort of 5-10 years ago, and there were guys doing massive multi-million-dollar cap raises to go and build out, these huge distribution centers. And it seems that that's almost been semi-democratized by Amazon. And then obviously Shopify having a bit of a play in that space as well. But I do see that the future of commerce over the next sort of 3 to 5 years is that consolidation of where, agency isn't just selling website or ads, but they're actually providing service and logistics and supply chain, and there will be a consolidation there. But that's all of tech, right? All of tech is people create one amazing app, like you said, for $50 a month. That gets acquired, it gets bundled into a bigger thing, and then the bigger thing gets bundled into a bigger thing, right? And there is constant elevations of that.
So I think you're absolutely correct. And the way I'm reading it is, if you start with the consumer is always where everything starts within this space, right? So what's happened, especially, it's happening more now in Australia, but it happened a lot in North America and the UK. The consumer became aware that they could get stuff very, very quickly. I mean, people used to say it would be the Amazon that drove that in Australia. I think it was Uber Eats that did it. The notion that I can basically plug something in and half an hour later, a guy turns up with my food, and I can get any option I want.
Behavior. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I think people go, well, why do I have to wait for my consumer product? Why do I have to wait a week for it? That doesn't make sense. So then if you think about it, to be able to support that, a restaurant's kind of a unique situation where you've got a bunch of raw products you then manufacture into something that then goes out the door. And so you can do it in a relatively confined space. Whereas with physical products, you need a lot of warehousing space and you need to be able to move things around, and it's just a slower process. But the reality is that it can be achieved. And so maybe I don't think 15 minutes will become the main expectation set, but I think there's no reason why now and in the future, if you're in a main metro in Australia or even like within a short space around that, you couldn't have an expectation of same day, next day as your base level for delivery. I think that's where it's going to get to. I've been saying that for a few years. And then if you kind of reverse engineer that, you go, well, how do you achieve that outcome? The reality is that you as the retailer are going to have product much closer to consumer, and you're going to have to be able to move it through your system a lot faster. So then becomes, I think, to the point you were making, is like all of a sudden there's this role for third-party aggregators of logistics and warehousing and all the other bits and pieces in between, all the plumbing, to be able to support that. And it doesn't, there will be certain retailers who've got scale to do it, but a lot of them will be like, well, there's no reason for me to have to invest in 5 distribution centers across Australia. I can just park products in 5 great providers, and my customers will get the benefit of that. And I think that sort of take off is where it's going to happen, and you'll see a lot of this aggregation of that capacity, because you're going to need a lot of capital in the form of automation, robots, and just basic good processes with a lot of scale to be able to achieve that outcome.
Well, I think that's been. I think that's really insightful. Talking about Uber Eats being a changing learned behavior, and service as a differentiator has certainly started to trump up. Where we used to be how many SKUs and have I got the most? Am I the cheapest? Have I got the most Facebook followers? 2007, those were our three metrics, right? Whereas now we've got, Milk Run, Jimmy Brings, Woolies Metro, the necessity coming in there is key. And I think there's a lot of retailers that still miss out that the service is a differentiator. I had an experience recently. I ordered a Skylink, and Elon managed to get that to me from the US to the far north of New Zealand in 4 days. I'm still waiting for a t-shirt and a pair of kicks that I ordered from Auckland 10 days ago, right? And so which one of those brands am I raving about and saying is, incredible experience? It's not the one that can't get me a pair of trainers in 10 days and 300 kilometers, right? I don't know where that stops and starts with the consumer tolerance though, right? And I think COVID has taught some tolerance into the consumer, but I think that little honeymoon window of, right, we've done COVID now, I've waited that month for a delivery, I now expect to go back to 48-hour windows. Yeah,
I think you're right. So a few points on that. I think the one is the honeymoon period is definitely over. I think we got the benefit of that mostly in 2020. We got a little bit of the benefit last year with with the lockdowns. And I think this comes back to the main point, the differentiator between the Skylink. I mean, he's got a $900 product US, which there's a fair amount of margin in, and he can afford or charge you, or because it's a pretty differentiated product, he either afford to charge you or will absorb the cost of putting it on the most premium shipping service. Whereas the guys in Auckland, it's probably $150 maximum shipping with relatively limited margin, and they're using basically one of the many providers. I think one of the realities, and this comes back to the shipping issue, is that most of the providers didn't fall over. Most of the posts and the couriers, they didn't fall over per se, but their ability to be able to create consistent outcomes was very, very challenged, because all of them got overwhelmed very quickly and continued to be overwhelmed for most of the period, even to now. We've got the Omicron surge in New Zealand, and the delivery standards are all over the place because they're all downstaffed. Now, it's not a criticism, it's just a statement of fact. What I'm seeing happen and what we've had to do is, it comes back to what I was sort of describing about our experience at the beginning with international. You're having to get creative about how do you actually do your shipping, because you can't just hand it over to one provider and hope for the best and it'll get there. Because what we found happening was, we'd give it to one provider, would end up in one of their big depots, and it might sit there for a week or 2 weeks because those depots are so overwhelmed. And then it would just pop out the other end eventually. But what do you tell the customer in that time? Hey, I told you it was going to be 3 days because that's what I've been told, and my history tells me that. But all of a sudden, it's taken me 2 weeks to get it to you, and I've got no control over that. So what we've had to do in certain lanes is go, right, well, are there custom bespoke solutions where there are the particular provider we can work with to achieve a certain outcome in a certain jurisdiction, and then try and figure out how to plug more of these in to make sure that we get the consistency of delivery around those areas. But I think we're at the onset of that, and it'll be interesting to see. Either one of two things has to happen in my mind. Either the traditional carriers need to step up and put the investment in to be able to achieve the scale that we're moving into and that we've had over the course of the lockdowns, or we're going to see a lot of smaller players emerge who will just solve particular problems for particular areas, and we'll just work within that. And I think, to some extent, I think the crowdsourced version model has kind of achieved that for that exact reason. If you get delivery of majority of the refrigerated product in, like, if I get meat delivered or whatever it is in Sydney, there's like a couple of providers who just focused on that niche, and they do it really, really well. And the stuff will turn up in a refrigerated van and off it comes. I mean, Woolies or Coles or Countdown, whoever, have got their own refrigerated trucks, but the smaller guys can't afford that. And it comes back to my initial thesis, which is that I think you're going to just see this layer of providers who will achieve that outcome and be able to give you, as the retailer, the thing that you need, which is the ability to be able to give a consistent level of service. I used to think it was speed was the number one determinant. Now I don't think so. Now I think that actually speed is important, but I think what's more important than speed is being able to be consistent in what you say. So if you say it's going to be delivered on Thursday, deliver on Thursday. If you're going to say it's going to be delivered on Tuesday, deliver on Tuesday, and whatever that is, that the promise that you're making. Because I think if the customer sees something and it arrives in that time frame, then they're happy. And having it arrive 1 day early 3 times, but the 4th time it arrives 5 days late, that just that kills the whole experience entirely.
So whilst we're wearing our capitalist, monopolistic hats, does this always mean that the big continue to get bigger? Because if your Woolies can do a refrigerated service, but your new startup organic corner store can't do that, how do they have a competitive edge in market?
Well, you kind of raised an interesting one. The milk run guys, the volley guys, I don't know if their models will stack up. So this ultra fast 15-minute grocery delivery, which I've tested, and it's amazing. Like the other day, I tried it out. I ordered a $3 item. It cost me $2 for shipping, so a $5 total cost. It arrived within 15 minutes with a guy on a bike, and they gave me a free avocado. So I mean, that was at least $5 back. But so that's just VC. That's VC capital. That's VC economics, right? These guys are well funded.
This is VC where they've got a metric of repeat purchase rates. So give the guy an avocado and they'll order again. It's scary times.
Which was a great experience. It really was good. And so this has come out of the US. There's a model. The guys are trying it there in New York, and I think the generosity there is even greater. Like they'll give you the first $30-$40 worth of groceries free. And the logic is that sorry,
are they called Gorilla? The one in New York?
There's a few. I think they're one of a few. Yeah, there's definitely, and these guys locally have emulated that model. I don't know if they're doing it in New Zealand yet, but it has started in Sydney at least. And the economics there don't make sense at the moment. But in the same way that Uber didn't make sense in the beginning either, and Uber Eats as well, and Just Eat, and all these guys. But the reality is that it's a network effect. And I guess the answer is if you win the fight, then you end up being able to make money in the long run. And then what was interesting was when Amazon was questioned on this in one of their earnings calls, they came out and sort of smugly said, no, we're pretty confident that even our solution is just as good, even though they're not as fast, but they've got far more SKUs and they're building out capability. So I thought that was an interesting contrast. So to your question, can the corner store compete in this way? Possibly not the corner store in its current iteration. But if you think about these guys, these startup guys, it's essentially that. It's basically a corner store on wheels. There is a way to do it. Now, will the model stack up and work in the long run? I don't know, but that's the beauty of this, right? They're obviously convinced of the case. They've convinced some people to finance them and back them. We get to find out in the actual market whether it does or it doesn't. And could it be that Woolies ultimately is the winner long run, or Amazon, whoever it's going to be in the US? Possibly, but it's very possible that these guys could carve out a nice little chunk of the business and take that away. And that's that is the ultimate beauty of this industry that we work in. The big do get bigger, but everyone else gets bigger too, because the overall market is growing at such a rate, and the opportunity set for ideas to be tested and proven or disproven is always there. And some ideas, do very well for a period of time, carve out a huge niche, and then disappear. A great example would be the group buying sites. The Groupons of the world, or the flash sale sites of the world. Once upon a time during the GFC, we had a glut of inventory. They made a ton of sense because there were these kind of walled gardens, and people could just throw cheap stuff in there without bastardizing the brands, and to the extent that they thought they could, and find a market for it. We fast forward a little bit, the glut ends, and then those models don't stack up anymore. So we'll see.
Well, from your Kiwi days, do you remember the website vouchermate.co.nz?
I don't. What does that do?
So that was one of those sites where you signed up and retailers paid to put their vouchers on there. It was basically like a couponing site of where it was we will facilitate brands to get coupons into consumers' hands who are discount shoppers. And for a while they went gangbusters. I think they were purchased by NZMe or something like that. They were recently put on Trade Me for sale for like $5,000. Right, for someone just to buy their domain name. So you could almost literally, I'd love to go and do like a Google relevancy search, and you can almost track the exact bell curve that they would have gone through. It's an interesting dynamic. Hey, look, Jethro, I've chewed up your time, but I always like to finish with a top tip for those that have been brave enough to listen to us waffle for 45 minutes. So we've talked a lot about shipping. Why don't you give us like a hot tip on some of those shipping strategies around when are you charging freight free, when are you charging express? What are some of those learnings and little hustle plays and successes you've had at the Nile?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we've learned is really each channel needs to be dealt with separately. So even on the marketplaces, they'll behave differently. So it's really important to kind of understand how the algorithm works that's serving you up your traffic. So if in the case of eBay, free shipping gives you a massive boost in their algorithm. Amazon, it's not necessary, but if it can help. And then Google has a totally different play where it's just a question of what it visually looks like for the consumer to be able to work out whether or not it makes sense or otherwise. So I'd say the basic thing is just make sure that you've got A, set expectations really, really clearly up front. B, make sure that you can actually deliver to those expectations. Those are the basic hygiene factors. And then on a channel by channel basis, kind of really interrogate how whatever the algorithm is that you're working with actually works, and how shipping plays into that, and then try and figure it out, work towards that outcome, because that will give you the best outcomes that you can get. Once upon a time, we took a very definitive charge for shipping for everything, then we went free shipping on everything, and now we've got a more sort of nuanced approach depending on where it's coming from and the consumer behavior. So I don't know if it's useful or otherwise, but I would say just kind of really think it through and don't try and take a one size approach to everything, because it's one of those things that you can tweak that'll make a massive difference if you kind of just get the setting right.
Sounds like we need to monetize your algorithm, Jethro. Tremendous. Thank you so much for spending some time with us on Chill today. Love the story, love the whole underdog spirit, and the growth you've had is exceptional. So all power to you, and hope to see much more international expansion in the years to come, my friend.
Thank you so much. Really, this has been awesome.